7, 8, 9, 10.
Do you have a pocket?
I sure do.
So you can go anywhere you want to. I'll try to follow you in the camera.
What?
Maybe you'll take it.
Just read a sentence or something so you get the feel for it.
Sure.
What shall we read? Let's see here.
I can hear feedback somewhat, a little bit. Now? Okay, now it is. May God be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine upon us, so that your ways may be known on earth, your salvation among nations.
I think he's happy.
Is that okay?
There's a mute button on that. So.
Salvation among nations.
I think he's happy.
Is that okay?
There's a mute button on
Good evening. Recognizing that there are folks who will be joining us online, and it's way more boring to sit and stare at a screen where nothing's happening than to sit and stare at a screen where something is happening, I thought maybe we should get ourselves started. But the real reason to get ourselves started is so we have more time to hear from our keynote speaker slightly later on. I'm Mark Douglas. I'm professor of ethics at Columbia Theological Seminary, and it is my deep pleasure to invite you to the opening keynote address for the Just Creation Shalom for Our Common Home Conference. This conference is a long time coming. In 2019, Columbia Seminary had a major conference on migrations and border crossings dealing with displaced persons. And we thought at that time that we would have a conference every other year. And then it turned out that the non-human natural world had other ideas for us. With the beginning of COVID, we started pushing things back so that when we did have a conference, we could again gather for something like this. And because partly of the experience of COVID and recognizing that we all live deeply enmeshed in non-human systems that have huge impacts on how we live with each other, the focus for the conference on environmental justice and creation justice felt natural. So that is the nature of this conference for us, is to focus on those things. Over the coming days, we will have the chance to hear from activists, from scientists, from theologians, from people on front lines and people in public policy settings who are making a difference in shaping communities of resilience today and into the future. So it's a delight to have you all here, whether you are in person or whether you are online. And we hope that the time that you are a part of this conference will be enriching to you and that it will help you build networks. In a time when things are breaking down, building networks is a revolutionary activity. And it's the type of revolutionary activity that will sustain us for years and decades to come. And so part of the purpose of this conference isn't only to hear really smart people with really great ideas. It's to hang out with other really smart people and share really great ideas. This conference could not have been possible without the work of many, many, many people. And I want to start by naming the steering committee that helped create this conference. I'm going to name their names. I hopefully will not forget anybody. I would invite them to stand as I call their names. So among the others, we have Julie Bailey, Brennan Breed, Bill Brown, who is standing online, I know right now, I just got a text from him, Kelly Campbell, Jake Myers, Raj Nadella, Christine Yoder, and one person for whom this could not have been done if we didn't have her, Karen Wishart-Christian, who is the center of all things this conference related. So a special thanks to Karen. Likewise, we want to make sure that we thank a couple of the people at Columbia Theological Seminary, thinking about communications office, Jennifer Cuthbertson and her crew down there, and thinking about the maintenance office, Cindy, wherever you are. God bless you for all of the work that you and your crew did. It was spectacular. I also want to recognize many of our sponsors and partners. As I say, networks are vital. And we went out and sought partnerships and have partnerships with over 25 different organizations. And we have sponsorship, that is people and organizations that funded us from 8. And rather than kind of name them all, you'll see them on the screen here and at the seminary from time to time. This conference is special because of you. And I'm grateful for all that you did. One of those partners is this church, Decatur Presbyterian Church, who time and again hosts Columbia Seminary for its events here. And with that, I want to turn it over to their head of staff, Todd Speed, to say a couple of words of welcome from the church.
Senior pastor and tonight a parking attendant. Thank you, Mark. For those of you who may not know, Mark and I and Lindsay and Melanie share Atlanta United tickets, and we get to celebrate those games together. Friends, welcome. Welcome to Decatur. Welcome to Decatur Presbyterian Church. This is a special place in this world. If you don't know that already, it's a unique setting for Christian ministry in the 21st century, and not just because there's 85 restaurants and bars within walking distance. Here at the corner of Church and Sycamore Streets, we cross paths with people from all walks of life and from all over the globe every single day. And what a blessing that is. When it comes to people from all walks of life, our Threshold ministry, which is housed in the little house across the street, the youth ministries in the back and Thresholds in the front, we try to enter into relationship with those who are suffering from life circumstances, make connections to resources, and provide hospitality. And that's an important part of our ministry here. If you see anybody on the street tonight, you can tell them that the next couple of nights there'll be a cold weather shelter just around the corner at the Methodist Church. In terms of people from all over the world, in the building behind us where you'll go for the reception following, on the top floor we host a Global Village Project. It's a school for 42 young women between the ages of 12 and 18 who've had interrupted education and spent time in refugee camps, and they come here and become prepared to go into regular school, and the success stories coming out of that school over the last 12 years have been quite amazing. It's a privilege to host the Global Village Project. In addition to our preschool, which is in the next building over, and lots of wonderful young children in our preschool and kindergarten, and had a great time with them in chapel yesterday. We are facing our 200th year, 2 years from now, 198 years old, and there's a lot of history there, and we look forward to celebrating that, but also acknowledging the wonderful parts of that history and the kind of mixed parts of that history, and that will be an interesting challenge and hopeful time for us. Most recently, just in the last several months, we've installed something we've been wanting to do for a long time, and it finally came to fruition. On the roof of the building above where you'll have the reception, the McGahee building, there is a brand new solar installation. And we've been looking forward to that project for a long time. And that's very exciting for us, and we're thrilled that it's there. And I wish you could see it, but it's on top of the building. You can't see it. And then finally, as your host tonight, I'll mention the facilities. If you prefer 1950s restrooms, you can go to the narthex. Behind you, or if you like more modern facilities, you can go through these doors down the hall right by the reception desk, and there are more modern facilities for you there. Friends, we are very, very glad you're here tonight. We're thrilled to be hosting this part of the conference and look forward to some good words tonight and some great workshops and speakers for the rest of the weekend. And now our esteemed new president, Reverend Dr. Victor Aloyo, will offer some more words.
Friends, good evening. On behalf of the trustees and faculty, students, and administrative staff, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Just Creation Conference. And as Dr. Douglas mentioned, we are grateful for all who have contributed to the development of this conference, a conference that is greatly needed to have conversations, to listen to the ideas, and to listen to activists and scientists and theologians that will be in our midst beginning this evening through tomorrow and part of Saturday. We are especially grateful for your presence with us today. It is my great honor and joy to introduce tonight's opening keynote speaker, Heather McTeer Toney. Her distinguished career as a public figure began in 2004 when she was elected the first African American, first female and youngest mayor of Greenville, Mississippi at age 27. In 2009, she became chairwoman of the Environmental Protection Agency's Local Government Advisory Committee, and in 2014, she was appointed by President Barack Obama to serve as the EPA's regional administrator for the Southeast region, where she served until 2017. Heather holds a bachelor's degree in sociology from Spelman College here in Atlanta and a law degree from the Tulane University School of Law. She is also a prolific writer and speaker who has been featured in numerous publications and is the author of the upcoming book, Before the Streetlights Come On, Black America's Urgent Call for Climate Solutions. As you will see and hear in a moment, Heather is one of the most dynamic and inspiring leaders working on environmental issues today, because her work never loses sight of the fact that climate and environmental issues are fundamentally justice issues. She highlights the ways in which the intersections of environmental degradation, economic inequality, and racial discrimination form a complex web of challenges and opportunities for communities across the country as we all work to build a more resilient, sustainable, and affirming future. Friends, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Heather McTeer Toney.
Shalom, peace, and I'm from Mississippi, so how y'all doing? Hey. I am so grateful to be here this evening, and I thank each of you for taking out of your time to be here with us this evening as well. Thank you to Mark Douglas for being so gracious in hosting myself, my daughter who's here with me tonight, Dariah. Thank you to the pastor of this church. I appreciate you being the parking attendant. Thank you to the president for your gracious welcome as well. And y'all should know now, I am the daughter of a civil rights attorney, trial attorney, the great-granddaughter of a woman who was a pastor in the Church of Holiness. So I am very appreciative that a mic was available, because I'm gonna try my best to stay right here. But I cannot promise you I might not be on the other side of that stage. So we're just gonna go as God moves, and I'm grateful for that too. I'm coming to you from the land of the Chickasaw and Choctaw people indigenous to Mississippi, and acknowledging the space in the land that people have held that sometimes goes unacknowledged. And I think it's important for us to remember the spaces that we hold have not always been our own, but they have been a part of what we are challenged to care for. And so let's talk about that in truth and in honesty and in the spirit of what God has called us to do. It's one of my favorite things to do, because also often when we talk about climate and environmental justice and issues, people tend to think that you can't connect faith to climate action. And that's insane to me. To examine how we think of justice, how we think of faith, and the intersections is critical to our call to action as Christians, or at least in the Christian faith that I was brought up in. Psalms 24, 1 and 2 reads, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods." Now that's the King James Version. And I grew up reading the King James Version in church. I grew up in Greenville, Mississippi. I was a member of New Hope First Baptist Missionary Church. So like I said, if I see me across the stage, charge it to my heart, not my head. But that version was what we knew and what we memorized. The Common English Bible version says, "The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all its inhabitants too. Because God is the one who established it on the seas, God set it firmly on the waters." Now, my favorite version is the Common English version. And it says, "The earth and everything on it, including its people." People weren't even first. "The earth and everything on it, including its people, belong to the Lord. The world and its people belong to him. The Lord placed it all on the oceans and rivers." Now, I know I'm talking to some Bible scholars tonight. So it was really interesting to me that when I read the King James Version, the American Standard Version, the Young's Literal Translation from 1898, they all described that last sentence as floods. But now when I read Amplified Message, the International Children's Bible, God's Word translation of the 71 English versions of the Bible that I was able to look at, that last section described waters and rivers. It didn't say floods. And it made me beg the question, why are we looking at the same body of things differently? Because when I envision a flood, it is vastly different than what I envision when I say rivers and waters. And it also reminded me of this question: how are we seeing what we're describing? You know, there's no escaping the relationship between faith and environment and climate action, especially in communities of color and especially in the Black church. In the Black church, the images of heaven we sing about, pray for, and hope for soon to come are filled with bright skies and clear waters and land so full of natural resources that the diamonds and precious stones that we dig up here on earth are literally lining the streets of heaven. It's the place that's filled with all of the good things that we don't have enough of here on earth, without the pain, without the inequity, without the despair. Enslaved Africans were encouraged to envision it as an escape from the brutality of slavery. In fact, many used their knowledge of the natural environment to help them to get to heaven, either by traversing the rivers and streams or to die trying. But now, I don't recall a single Sunday school lesson about a hurricane in heaven. The peaceful environment that embodies freedom is something that Black folks have been fighting for the entire existence of our goal to get to struggle. And so, making this difference, going back to Psalms 24, 1 and 2, and this difference in this last sentence, and the Lord placed it all, everything, on the oceans and rivers versus the Lord established everything upon floods, made me question, how do we square these two? The earth, the space, the environment that serves as the very establishment of good from God itself, the rivers and waters that are so eloquently described in the verse 2 of Psalms 24, how do we equate that to an environment of floods? The environment as a part of the system, is it a part of our system of shackles of imprisonment for people of color that are forced to bear floods because of unfair infrastructure that's in our community? Is that what we're supposed to see? How do we balance this place that's described as the best for all of us as a place that is supposed to punish us? Is the air we breathe and the water we drink based on racism? My God. These two versions have to square themselves. And just like the different versions of the scriptures that I read, I believe it's really all in our perspective, as it is in all of these translations. How we view it and then talk about it is our responsibility and our accountability to the opportunity. That's why understanding the importance of environmental justice is so critical to the solutions of climate change. And more importantly, at least to me, it's the weight of the core of the tenets of my faith. The commandment that God gave us was to love everything, to love it all. That's the greatest commandment. Now, God didn't say anything about like. He didn't tell me I had to like my neighbor. That's not in the scripture. And I did look through several of the translations, Pastor. I promise you, I didn't see it. He didn't say like, he said love. So we have to change our perspective and change the narrative. Because what encumbers one of us, it encumbers us all. So I think we have to take a look back a little bit and take a look back through some of the history. You know, during the period of enslavement, the Civil War and Reconstruction, Christianity meant spiritual deliverance and some semblance of equality for Black Americans, even when it did not exist in the day-to-day lives here on earth. See, equality in nature wasn't a question. The scripture says that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. That's Matthew 5:45. The sun didn't distinguish color when beaming down the midday heat. Trees didn't decide who to protect and who not to based upon one's social status. And rivers most certainly don't discriminate based upon who was flowing or running through one's current. Some would come to believe that the elements of nature actually worked on the behalf of people of color as a source of protection. The pigment of our skin more closely aligned with that of the environment. Nature is a great equalizer. Our ancestors were brought to this continent and suffered insurmountable pain. Some found solace in a newfound faith that was pressed upon them. They grabbed hold of those tenets that were familiar to home. Rivers flowing like the Jordan in heavenly blue skies were so familiar to the rivers that they had seen before they were captured. And maybe, just maybe, part of that faith was a belief that despite the physical bondage, they could be free through Christ. But there's also an obligation to look at how the captivity into freedom could turn into somebody else, turn into something else. And how we must all collectively look at how this ability of God to care for us, despite the circumstance, is a part of our requirement to take care of God's creation. It's creation care versus dominionism. It's your job. It's the thing you're supposed to do. That means that we have to deal with some hard issues. It is not going to be easy. It's never easy when you think you have an opportunity to care for something that is easy to care for. I am still waiting for the manual of instruction on how to raise a child. If anybody has it, please share it with me. Because despite my search through scripture and Barnes & Noble and online and every self-help book possible, these are still challenges, but it does not negate my obligation to do the best I can do to be a good parent. And that means we're going to screw it up sometimes. But God must have had some type of faith in humanity to give us the responsibility to care for and be overseers, oversight over creation, especially since, according to Scripture, we weren't the first ones that he was thinking about. So how do we deal with this? It's easy to look in another place and see what's wrong and point it out and say what they should do. It's more difficult when it gets closer to home. It's easy to look at the extreme weather events that happen, the hurricanes, the floods, the tornadoes, the fires that are taking place out west, and say, oh, climate change is important, and those people in that community, they should focus on improving their community, because who wouldn't want that in order to make sure that your children are safe? But how is it that we can tell people what they should do when at the same time some of those very same people are simply trying to figure out how to put a roof over their head, or how to make sure that they have the medicine that they need, or how to make sure that their children are going to school, or how to make sure that they are even able to eat? How do we judge what they're able to do? We've all seen, I'm sure, the terrible situation that happened in East Palestine, Ohio, with the train derailment. The travesty of seeing a community that had to deal with the explosion of chemicals on a train railway going right by where their high school and their post office was. And I know a lot of us looked and like, oh my God, what must that be like? And it was amazing to me the attention that we were giving. Not that it was not due and necessary, because it absolutely was and still is. But the similarities between what took place in a predominantly white Christian conservative community and what has been taking place in St. James Parish, Louisiana, Alabama, and North Carolina are stark. Because East Palestine, Ohio wasn't the first time a train went off the tracks in a community. Trains have been going off the tracks in communities around this country for years. And we must ask the question, why did this all of a sudden get so much attention when people have died in the past and we haven't looked at it as an environmental issue that requires our attention, our concern? Dr. Robert Bullard, who was a professor and known as the father of environmental justice, he used to teach at Clark Atlanta University when I was at Spelman. He's now at Texas Southern, and I'm grateful to be able to call him a mentor. And when the train incident happened, I was doing some media on it, and he sent me a note, and it was a note of the interviews and studies that he had done in Granitesville, South Carolina, on January the 6th of 2005. And he said, Heather, some people have forgotten about that, because on the early morning of January 6, 2005, two Norfolk Southern Railway Company trains crashed into each other, releasing deadly chlorine gas, and it killed 9 people, and 240 people were forced to evacuate. And he went and he took an interview of the people who were in this community. And it was stark that this was a predominantly Black community. And in this space of a wreck that happened at 2:40 a.m., people found that minority people were left there until last. And so he did an interview with a lady by the name of Pamela Hall. And he asked Ms. Hall, do you think this community will ever recover mentally and economically from what happened? And these are her words. She said, I believe there will be a recovery in time. God is going to bless you, and that God is going to give you the serenity that you need to recover. How long will it take? Nobody knows. Economically, I think it's going to take a while for people to get where they need to be financially, even with my business and myself. A lot of businesses have lost business because of that, and so it's going to take time to build up that comfort zone for others to come back. But mentally, people have to have faith in God and believe that they can get over whatever the situation is that they are in. Is that possible? Yes, I think it is. And those were the words of a Black woman who was in the middle of a situation where her son was not only asthmatic, but she had to flee at 2:40 a.m. When she was asked, what actions would you like to see from the government? She said, to treat all residents the same without regard to race, color, national origin, income, or place of residence. If nothing else, it makes it crystal clear that we need to understand the importance on small communities and anything that could continue to take life in seconds. I would like to see continued sampling of the air, soil, and water to let us know what the status is, and don't just keep us blind. The exact same words that we heard come from a community. That was back in 2005. And I raise that and I say that because it becomes incumbent upon us to connect these dots for people. Because just like in East Palestine, the trusted sources for the communities is not always the government, especially for people of faith. When they want to know what's really going on, Pastor, they go to their church. They call their pastor. They go online to Facebook. They go to type in. They call their aunt's cousin on their mama's side, the one that they didn't get along with, and say, girl, what's going on at your house? Are they telling y'all to leave? Well, I don't know what to do. They ain't telling us to leave. I'm going to sit right here for a minute. That's how we talk to one another, who our trusted partners are, our trusted friends, and we have to begin to step into the space that we speak up about these environmental issues in our communities, because we are the trusted sources for people. It's necessary to wade into these tough environmental spaces, like the approval of the Willow Project. The Willow Project is ConocoPhillips' massive oil drilling operation in Alaska's Western Arctic. It's slated to produce a peak of 180,000 barrels of oil a day. It is sensitive in an ecosystem in Alaska, and it's near indigenous communities. But I don't know about y'all. I don't know how many people have been to Alaska. I haven't. It's one of those things that we see and we can say, that is a shame. We want to move off of fossil fuels. But how are we speaking and talking about these things that are impacting people who are not like us, who are not of us, who aren't in our space? It's far away. But tougher still are battles that become closer to home. Willow might be far away, but how close is the $90 million public safety facility that's supposed to be built in this space? How close is it to congregations and parishioners of the greater Atlanta metro area? I'll pause. Because these are the tough things that we have to think about. It's hard. It's hard to deal with controversial topics. It's hard to deal with controversial issues. It's hard to deal with things that don't sit in the spaces that we sit in every day. But just like Flint, Michigan, and just like the Jackson water crisis in Mississippi, where I'm from, these crises and environmental impacts that are dealing with our earth and our planet, the hurricanes, the red tide along our coastal waterways in Florida, we can't just say go plant some more trees without acknowledging the fear that black and brown people have about trees, because some of our ancestors hung from the same variety that some people want to go in and plant. I understand I might be stepping on some toes. It's okay. We're going to heal together. Because these are the difficult things that have to be said. And until we're able to say them and understand and see from different perspectives how we have to heal and grow together, that's when we get to the point of really doing what God told us to do in Psalms 24. It's how we view whether or not it's a river or a flood. It's from the perspective. Because what might be a river to you is a flood to somebody else, and what might be a flood in somebody else's house is perfect for you. But our responsibility is to care for God's creation. He gave us that job. And it means we have to spend time with one another. It means we have to spend time in the difficult places. It means we have to go sometimes and mess up. And be okay with messing up. Because it's not until you mess it up that you understand what you need to go back and make sure somebody else doesn't do again. I was always taught that I may be in one role for one community and might not see the fruit of that. There's one to plant, there's one that waters, and then there's one that harvests. But for whatever the reason, sometimes we think we're supposed to do all three of them at the same time. And that the people who are sowing the seeds, that they have to stick around and watch to make sure that the people who are watering know what they're doing. And then the people who are sowing the seeds and the people who are watering are sitting here looking over the people who are supposed to be harvesting to make sure that they're getting all of it. Because they spend all this time over here sowing these seeds and they sure don't want you to mess it up. But that's not the job we were told we were supposed to do. It's incumbent upon us to spend time with each other so that we are trusting one another to do the things that we are called to do. That we are learning and growing through this moment of engagement through our faith, through our learning of Scripture. That we're able to truly fulfill justice in the way that we are sharing a perspective. And we are being efficient and responsible of God's creation. My mother was a school teacher in the public school system in Greenville, and then she later operated her own Montessori program in the Mississippi Delta. And watching her in these different spaces, both of being a school teacher under the direction of a building principal, and then later being her own entrepreneur, owning her own business with her partner, teaching children, she would always make these references to education and how things worked in a building. And I have always thought about the difference between a building principal and a custodian. They both have keys to every door and every space in that building. They can go in and out of them with ease, but they don't carry the same responsibility. Now, the custodian is in charge of the care and upkeep. The custodian is the person that is going to go in there and make sure if the kids have messed up a toilet, they have not only cleaned that toilet out, but they know how much toilet paper is supposed to be in each one of those stalls and how much is supposed to be used because they watch the children every single day. They know better than anybody else the amount of toilet paper that should be used in that elementary school on any given semester. If the building principal has a question, she's going to go ask the custodian. Because the custodian fixes and knows the environment of the building. But now, the building principal is the one that has to go pay the bill. The building principal is the one that's charged with the budget. The building principal is the one that is ultimately responsible to the school board and has to account for everything. As Christians, we are custodians on this earth, but sometimes we try to operate in God's role as the building principal. That's not our job. He didn't give us that responsibility. We have the same set of keys. We have access to every single part. We can go in and out as we so choose. But now our responsibility isn't to go through and decide what the budget is. He told us to take care of it. How is it that we now think that creation care is telling God how to use the resources that we are supposed to be taking care of? That's not exactly the definition. The definition that has been given and the responsibility that has been granted to us is to make sure that we are operating in a way that the earth does not have to groan out like it says in Romans. And right now our earth is groaning. It's groaning. Just as it describes. It is waiting on us. That's how the Bible describes it, at least in the versions that I've read, and I'm sure I've missed a few. But the earth is literally waiting on us to step up and take responsibility to care for it in the same way that we have a responsibility to care for our community, to care for our children, to make sure that we are doing it in an equitable fashion, that we know the earth well enough to take care of it. Because you can't take care of something that you don't know. My husband works on vehicles and cars. He can build an engine from anything. I couldn't tell you one part from the other. My responsibility is not to care for it, because I don't know it. He knows it, and he can care for it. How is it that we have been created alongside something and God has created us to be so precious and important, but we don't know the very thing we're supposed to care for because we haven't spent time with it? And that doesn't mean just going outside and spending time in nature. I'm the first person to tell you that I thought environmentalists was just white people who hugged trees and they were vegan, and that they lived in California, and that they didn't eat bacon, which is just against my southern tenet. I didn't see myself as an environmentalist because I didn't see images of myself. I saw singularity. I saw oneness. I saw, people that didn't look like culture. It didn't look like me. If I Googled what an environmentalist looked like, I didn't see myself. So how am I supposed to care for something that I don't see? Because I don't see myself in it. It means we have to change the perspective. I saw the flood. I didn't see the river. We have to get into the community. And it's our responsibility to do that. But to do it in a way that is of love, that is of hope, that is changing this narrative so that our work with climate is becoming synonymous with faith, with creation. Who else is more suited to solve the existential crisis of our time than people of faith? Because if there's anything that's necessary to come up with ambitious climate solution, it's going to take a little bit of science, a lot of money, and a whole lot of faith. So with all of the despair, all of the climate craziness that's going on, there are enough people who are thinking doom and gloom. The earth is waiting on people of faith to step up and say, we got it. Because this is what we are designed to do. This is what we are called to do. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas, and established it upon the floods. Or like I like in my version, the earth and everything on it, including its people. That's me, and that's you, and that's everybody that's watching us online and those that haven't even gotten the message yet. The world and its people belong to him. The Lord placed it all on the oceans and the rivers. Now, what are we going to do with it? I hope I've challenged you to think differently and expanded the way that we will go through this conference and think about how we can care for God's creation justly. Thank you.
Heather has graciously agreed to answer some questions, and we have a couple of mics, one on a string, one not on a string. So I'm going to ask a student volunteer who might be available to come up and handle the not on a string mic. Any student volunteers up for here? I can see you. I'm going to call names. There you go. Come on up, Leo. That mic. Just all right. So if folks have questions, we'll invite you to make your way. Actually, Leo, can you go up that side and I'll go up this side, just kind of where mics are. We'll have mics up available on either aisle, and we invite you to come up and ask some questions to Heather. So people with questions.
Thank you for that very, very powerful talk, and I really appreciate it.
I'm gonna go back over here. Tell me twice, I'm good. Okay.
I wanted to ask your opinion, with the Permian Basin being considered a climate bomb now and the approval of the Willow Project and, the state of the Amazon has got to be protected in 2 years or it could, decay and give off tons of carbon. What are your thoughts about how we as individuals can make change when our president, who I voted for, and promised to not permit new oil and gas leases, is now doing that?
So the question is, with everything that's happening globally, I think on climate, certainly looking at what's happening, you're right, in the Permian Basin, that's a lot of oil and gas extraction, a ton of petrochemical facilities expansion in the space, and certainly what I think is happening in what we call the lungs of our planet, the Amazon. It is frustrating when I think we see opportunities that the administration has to make choices that don't put us further down the line. We also have to realize, though, that doesn't give us liberty to stop, because there are going to be a lot of choices that we might not necessarily agree with, but it requires our constant action and presence and showing up. And that's one thing that I think, especially community groups, environmental justice groups that have been doing on the ground struggle for years, for generations, unfortunately, can teach us. Because we watch them look at scenarios that are not in the best interest of a community, and they still keep showing up. So I'm gonna sort of turn that back around, because one of the things that frustrates me, and I've been a part of the administration, is when something happens that's not necessarily the thing that we say we want the administration to do, or climate friendly, or whatever the issue is. Let's just put issue there. And then we say, oh, that's okay, I'm going home, I don't want to do this anymore. It makes me want to say constantly, we don't have the privilege to do that, because people on the front lines don't have that privilege. They just don't. They don't have the privilege to say, you know what, they give up, I'm not voting for anybody ever again, because they don't do what we want them to do. Thank you, you have just given the votes to people who are not going to do what we want them, that's in the best interest of the country. So we have to stay in there. We have to stay in this fight. We have to constantly say, you know what, these are not solutions that are in the best interest of our planet. And then we have to do something even more difficult, which is step up to either run for office or be appointed to office or serve in a space that we can make those decisions happen. Because until we are in these seats and spaces, we're going to continue to go through the cycle of having decisions made that are not in the best interest of our climate.
Thank you for those words. One of the things that I'm reminded of in what you just said is, as an ethicist, one of the frameworks that I frequently use in my work is sometimes when you have a menu of bad options, the least bad option is the best option. I'm wondering if you can parse out and maybe speak a little bit more explicitly, because I think that I notice that a lot of us in the audience from a particular cultural background You had an amen quarter, all right? But some people don't necessarily get the nuance of what you're saying between the rivers and the floods. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about that, because I think there's a cultural distinction that may have been missed.
Thank you for that. When coming up in Mississippi, I grew up in Greenville, Mississippi, which is a predominantly African-American community. And when I served as mayor of the community, it had been predominantly African-American, never had a black mayor. And so I grew up in a space where traditional, what I think we would call traditional Christian tenets and values, the things we think of as like the 23rd Psalm and how you read and you say Easter speeches and you say these things that you grew up knowing, and they refer to elements of nature, but there's no visualization of that nature because you don't see it in your surroundings every single day. And so growing up, I know what a flood is. A flood is what happens when you get a whole lot of rain and your street floods first because you don't have the infrastructure on that street, and so you got to wade through water to get out of the driveway, or you know if they say it's going to rain that your sewer is going to stop up because you don't have any infrastructure for the water to run off, or you don't have sidewalks in your community because it goes off into a ditch and you're automatically going to have a flood. That's what comes to mind for a lot of communities of color when they read the word flood in a Bible. It is not, oh, the winter or summer floods that are coming in every single year because that's what happens and that's what's supposed to happen. No, it is a structure of what has happened because of systemic racism that puts communities of color in a disadvantage. So when they read the word flood, they read hurt and harm to my space. Yes. Flood does not equate to a regular occurrence that's supposed to happen in nature, the ebb and flow that creates balance. No, no, no. Flood is what happens when you are protecting a white community up north versus a black community on the south side. It's what doesn't allow us to understand how we are supposed to embrace and deal with it. So when I'm reading and I read flood in a sentence, it doesn't speak to me in the same way that when I read a river. Now hold on, that's something different. Because see, from Mississippi, I know what a Mississippi River is, and that's completely different from rivers in other parts of the country. Because see, in Mississippi, you don't go down and play by the river. You respect the river. The river is the life source. It is the life source of agriculture. It is why we have some of the richest and best soil in the Mississippi Delta, is because the river, in all of its beauty and glory, enriched the soil of the community such that the farmland could be regenerated over and over and over again. The river is powerful. River is beautiful. And even as we imagine it and we see it in the Bible, we still have to equate for differences in our communities. Kids growing up on the south side of Chicago don't necessarily know what a meadow and a stream is, reading out of the King James Version of the Bible. And so we have to equate some of these things based upon our cultural experiences, and the only way we do that is when we spend time in community getting to know these communities and these spaces. And so that's why there's a difference in even how we read and interpret what the scripture is. Because if I'm going into a community in Houston, Texas, Manchester neighborhood where there are petrochemical facilities surrounding a playground, and I talk about a flood, no. Because that's a space where you have Hispanic, Latino community and people who don't know what it means to exist in a place without air pollution, who don't understand what it means to live in a place without contaminated water. So a flood means more harm. And these are the differences that we have to understand when we spend time with people, and why I think God has called us to spend time in community so that we can begin to see what justice means through alternative eyes and perspectives. I hope that's somewhat helpful.
I'm not going to give you the microphone. Okay. All right.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you.
I have to wear my pride flag today, especially today. Heather, thank you so much for every word you've just spoken and for that wonderful question that was asked so that the entire audience could get more of that contextualization. Thank you also for contextualizing what we're talking about and naming what's happening in our backyard. I'm wondering for folks who may be new or at an intersection or a crossroads of, I want to do something, but I'm not sure what I do about this thing, that the Atlanta Forest Defenders are losing life and resource and endangering themselves with domestic terrorism charges. What are ways that folks can disrupt and subvert the narrative about what's taking place and take action where they are? As an organizer and an activist with queer rights, like, action looks like so many different things. And I'd love to hear from you with this local context in mind. For folks in this room right now who have been empowered by your words, what does action look like with this particular horrifying incident happening right now in Atlanta? Yeah.
That's a difficult challenge for any community to face. Throughout the civil rights movement, there were reminders constantly for all parts of the community that we're faced with this very same question. And Atlanta has such a deep history of civil rights. I think it's important for us to take notes from our own history right here in this space. Leaders would say that some people need to be on the front lines. Somebody also has to be home to make money to provide bail. Somebody has to make sandwiches for people who are on the front lines. Somebody has to be sitting in the other rooms to hear what's taking place and provide information. Somebody has to run the call log and the phone tree. Somebody has to care for the children that might be at home while their parents are taking part in a different activity. Everybody has a role to play. Some people are simply learning and studying so they understand the history and they can be translators and interpreters to know what's actually taking place. Some people are sitting in government seats at tables where they can be of influence. Some people are sitting on pews collecting funds. Some people are preaching messages and studying scriptures to understand and identify the connections between nature and what is taking place. Some people are looking at the history of what is happening around the world and how it relates to what could be happening in our own backyard. Everybody has a role to play. And so, something that I have told my own child, just find what you like to do. Go to the place that you find joy in doing an activity and do that and connect it to your movement. It could be creating TikToks or being on Twitter because you like to be on your phone. But even that can be turned into activism. It could be being a beautician and sitting in a chair and doing people's hair, and as you are doing their hair, raising the issue of whatever is happening and creating a space for conversation and safe dialogue. That is action. It could be sitting in the line waiting for your child to be picked up from school and having a conversation with the person who is in front of you because you are ear hustling and listening to what they're saying, but you're scared to say something back. Say something and have conversation. That is action. I can't tell you what to do about the scenario, and I will tell you it is a difficult one because I've served in the seat of a mayor. I know how hard it is to make decisions that everybody does not agree on. In fact, I used to have a thinking that if everybody didn't like it, then I had to be doing something right because nobody was happy. But that's a difficult space. It's also really difficult to look at what is taking place in a land of a people that has been oppressed and suppressed that has been in transition and so important and critical to the environmental stability of a community. That's important. And so how we balance this cannot be left to one entity alone. It requires engagement from everybody, and it is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be short. What it will be is informed if all of the community are participating.
On that note, I'd like to ask if you would elaborate on difficult conversations, and if you can have some words of encouragement for people in positions of authority and power to go ahead and take that step to sit in a room with community members and have difficult conversations about inequity when it comes to funding and collaboration and consideration of all the environmental justice funding coming down the line. And also at the same time, to have some words for community organizations that also have to learn how to have difficult collaborative conversations, because it takes people from both sides. If you could just speak to that, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think one of the keys is consistency. It's consistency. It's not one time calling everybody into a room. I have a 3-meeting rule. I got a lot of rules, y'all. And this is actually one I wrote about. I called it my 3-meeting rule. There's a minimum of 3 meetings you're going to have in a community in order to get to an issue that's controversial. That first one, everybody's going to be mad. And you just got to sit through it. It's going to be a long meeting. Everybody is going to be upset. They are going to be angry. They are going to come. They're going to call you things that you probably like, I don't believe you just said that, but yes. And that's going to happen. And at that meeting, you sign up for the second meeting. At that meeting, you tell everybody, this has been a meeting. And we're going to go ahead and set time for the next meeting. And that next meeting, you're going to have people who come back just to see if you're going to show up. That's all. They just want to see if you're going to be there. And you have some people who didn't come to the first one, who heard about the first one, and then want to come and be at the second one, so they can tell you what they thought. And so you have that second meeting. That third meeting, the third meeting is where you identify workers. That's where you identify collaborators. That's where we identify people who are not only showing up, but we're showing up with an intent and purpose. Those are people you know that it doesn't make a difference if you schedule 4 meetings, a 4th meeting, or 45th meeting, they're going to be there. And if they're not going to be there, they're going to send a proxy. Or those are the workers. And those are people that you're going to learn, that you got to figure out, okay, this is how we're going to, this should be a network of folks that I got to be talking to. Now, I would be saying that from the perspective of a leader, that you're gonna recognize that you've got different groups that you need to realize are going to be here and going to be working with you. At the same time, from a community perspective, you got to have people who are going to show up and be willing to work. There have to be some people who are going to do more than just come to the meetings and fuss and cuss. The ability to listen and have common exchange. And it has to move. One of the things that was most helpful when I was serving in office, we had a big issue, and this isn't a big issue here, but I'm not going to say it is or isn't. We had an issue on streets. We had an issue on people feeling like they were not being heard. So we decided to take our council meetings outside of the city hall. My city councilman thought I was crazy. They're like, how are you going to move a city council meeting to a different place? I said, well, we'll just do one in each of your districts, each ward. And we'll figure it out over the course of the year. Every other meeting, or at least once a month, we have 6 wards. We'll do 6 meetings in these different places. And it removes some of the concern that people had about access, because no longer was it an issue of whether or not they could get to us. We were like, no, we'll come to you. Sometimes it's going to the spaces and being and sitting in uncomfortable spaces. But we have to learn how to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And part of that is an exchange that goes both ways. It's when you are in service and you're hearing a great message on faith and hope and love and all the things that we want to hear on Sunday morning to get our week up and going. Oh, that's what I needed to get my cup to the point of overflowing. But when you get to the parking lot, did you see the news this morning? I wonder what happened. Who was that got arrested? That's a shame. You've talked about all the issues in the parking lot as opposed to dealing with the issue in the space of faith. So sometimes we got to have these tough, difficult conversations in our space of faith. One of the reasons why I am at the church that I'm at now, and I go to Oxford United Methodist Church, shout out to Pastor Chris McAlilly, is because one of the first times that I went to church, he was dealing with the issue of racism in Oxford, Mississippi, down the street from Ole Miss, and a crowd of people that did not look like me. And I was looking around like, okay, well, here we are, let's talk. And those are the challenges that sometimes we're afraid to face. And God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and good common sense. That's also a sound mind. So it's just us talking and doing it consistently.
About here.
Hi, thank you for your talk. I'm out in San Francisco, California, where there's a lot of talk right now in both the city and in the state about reparations. And I'm curious, I mean, it seems to me that reparations might be one way to address some of the systemic racism that has plagued neighborhoods. But I don't know if in the work you do, if reparations is part of your conversation, or if you have any thoughts on what we can take back to California.
There are a number, thank you for that. There are a number of conversations that are taking place, I think, around the U.S. About what reparations could look like for disadvantaged communities, for African American communities. Are there models that have been used that we could reformat, repopulate in a way that protects and makes up for environmental harms that have been placed specifically on communities of color? And I think San Francisco is actually a great example dealing with a housing crisis that is not only impacted the city, but specifically impacted communities of color, and that aligning with what is very clear federal housing discrimination through redlining that took place in our country back in the 1930s and 40s. And so there's not a lot that we really have to look at to justify, because the federal government has very clear maps and very clear definitions of how they categorize communities of color. And I actually looked at some of the I think it was a 1934 housing map of Birmingham, Alabama. And so I actually looked at the map and saw where they had a specific line for Negro and the population of Negro people in a particular neighborhood, and then classified the neighborhood as only being fit for manufacturing and only being fit for landfill based upon simply that denotation. And as a result, what has happened in that community since that time has been extreme environmental injustice and harms and health impacts, right? So we can look at clear indicators around the country to see where you can make a direct line of where you need to invest income. And I think the environmental movement in a number of different places, Tamara Tolles O'Laughlin, she's with the Environmental Grantmakers Association, has been writing and talking about this quite a bit. I encourage you to go look up some of her work about how we can practically make this happen to not only rectify past harms in impacted community, but here's the great part: create climate innovation A lot of times we talk about environmental justice, it's a lot about making up for, without talking about where do we have opportunities to create, innovate, and create businesses in communities that help us realize climate solutions. Yes, we need to take care of the infrastructure, but yes, we also need to make sure that the next generation of children have really good paying jobs, because I want to retire on a beach. Okay? So I have a vested interest in this. So what are these new innovations? Why can't we have climate businesses, clean energy, renewable energy projects that are also targeted in some of the neighborhoods that have been disadvantaged? Are there opportunities to have solar paneling on this church, as well as churches that are in minority communities where they could also serve as centers of regenerating energy in case of extreme weather, in case of extreme cold, in case of extreme heat? Places where we have concrete, impervious surfaces where the heat is higher in the summertime, creating opportunity now for renewable energy projects that we see here and are doable here, but can create in another space that's creating income, improving health outcomes, and creating equity. That is another example, I think, of how reparations could be used and take away some of this fear of thinking we're just giving people 40 acres and a mule or a check that's comparable to that, because that's not what it is.
Seeing nobody rush to the mic, I think a better time would be for us to again stand and thank Heather, Toney.
Thank you.
Before you leave, a couple of quick announcements. The first is, and most important, is the conference will re-begin tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. at Columbia Presbyterian Church across the street from Columbia Theological Seminary with opening worship, and then we'll be continuing at Columbia Seminary after that. The second announcement is that immediately after this, back through those doors is a lovely reception for us where you can actually meet and greet Heather, as well as many of the folks here who are doing climate justice work. There will be a special little gift being recognized. Some of our intrepid students discovered that they share the same sorority as Heather, and they asked if they could do a little presentation. So hopefully that's going to happen there as well. I also saw two of my favorite activists conspiring over on the side, and I know there's an announcement coming that I think probably has to do a little bit with Cop City and the Old Forest. So, Leo, can you say a couple words?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Douglas. Good evening. Come on, y'all. I'm Baptist. Good evening. Okay, thank you. I was handed a note and really excited about it. So there's an opportunity, an invitation to come to the Wilani Forest. And it's not far, like maybe 10 minutes, 12 minutes from where we are, tomorrow at 4:30. So at 4:15, if you're interested in going to the forest, seeing some of the activists or talking with them, just being in the space, because I went and I'm afraid to go back because of what it has done to me and how it has stayed with me. But you might want to get some of that residue on you, right, this conference, and take it back home and let it marinate. So at 4:15 p.m., you can meet in front of Harrington Center at CTS at Columbia Theological Seminary. So 4:15 p.m. tomorrow. And if you have questions, Abby, right in the back, is the person to talk to, okay? Abby or the baby have the information.
Okay. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Abby. And thank you once again to Heather. It's great to have you, and thanks for starting off this conference so well. I invite you to rise blessed by the time that you've had here and make your way back there to enjoy the blessings of food prepared for you.